All right. Hello and welcome to, I believe, the 13th episode. I seem to never remember which episode number we're on. But welcome. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Adam, and this is Adam Answers. Not because I know everything, but because I love wrestling with difficult questions. I love diving into conversations and topics that I may not have ever thought about before. And also because I love alliteration, which is why the full title of the show is Adam Answers Absolutely Anything at All. Hope you guys are having an awesome Saturday. I don't know about where you live, but up here in the Great North, it is the fall. It is autumn. Summer is over. It is finally chilly out. Can't say really cold, but it's finally chilly out, like sweater weather that you would imagine fall would be like. It was warm for a couple of weeks, but thankfully it's gotten nice and cool. The leaves are falling. It's my favorite time of the year. Absolutely love it. And in fact, the fall or autumn is actually going to be slightly related to our question and conversation for today. But before we do that, we're going to dive into two quick points that I make before every show. The first point is this. I would love to hear what you have to say. More than I would love to hear myself talk. And so I would love to hear what your perspective is on the question of today, or perhaps there's a question in a past episode that you have a perspective on that you'd like to share. I would love to hear that perspective. And so share that in the comments, share it in the notes if you're listening on the live stream. I would love to hear what you have to say, and I would love to share what you have to say with other people who watch the show. And so we have more viewpoints other than just what Adam thinks. The second thing is if you would like to ask a question, have a question wrestled with on the show, go ahead and scan this QR code right here, just up here in the corner. It says ask a question. If you scan that QR code, it's going to take you to a Google form, little form that you fill out. And it's going to ask you what kind of question do you want to ask. And not just that, but it's also going to ask if you would be interested in coming on the show and wrestling with the question together. That would be awesome. I would love to do that. Someone who's watching the show thinks, I'd love to wrestle this question together, and just to hear what maybe he has to say, or maybe it's a question that you've had for a long time and haven't wrestled with before, and we'll wrestle with it together. Maybe you have those thoughts. I would love to hear what that question is, and I would love to wrestle it together with you. I would love to walk over that question and think about it in perhaps a different way than either of us have thought about it before. So go ahead and scan that QR code, fill out the form. I would love to hear from you. And if you want to stay up to date on new episodes of the live stream, I know that I don't post regularly. I've been saying ever since episode 1, I've been saying that I'm going to find a consistent, regular rhythm to do live streams on, and I haven't quite found that yet. I promise you that it'll come someday. But if you want to stay up to date on when episodes are happening live, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. If you're on YouTube, I know you might be watching this on another platform, but if you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. It helps me a lot in general, just with the channel, but it'll also help you stay up to date on when episodes are going to happen, because I do frequently schedule the episode, the live stream. I do frequently schedule it in advance. So with all of those out of the way, again, thanks for joining me today. I hope you're having a wonderful Saturday. With all those out of the way, I would like to dive into today's question. First, I'm going to make sure that the music is off. I always forget to turn the music off, and then I feel like sometimes it distracts. But the question for today, you can see it there down below. Is it okay to be sad? Now, let me actually just pop up my notes. I have just a little bit of notes here. Is it okay to be sad? Now, as with any question, what do we always do? Well, one of the things we always do with every question is we or we define the terms that we're using. So we're going to define what we mean when we talk about sadness. What do we mean when we talk about is it okay to be sad? We do that with just about every question, and that wasn't that wasn't a way that I had originally started the show. But as I started tackling questions and everything, I thought, you know what, that makes a lot of sense to start every episode this way because it's really important to define the terms. Sorry, I'm just trying to organize my notes here. It it's really important to define the terms that you're using and the questions that you're using. And so, if you go into a conversation with somebody and you're maybe you're trying to have an argument about what does it mean to self persist, right? What does it mean for me to be the same today as I was 10 days ago? You can't really have a conversation around that question unless you know what you is, right? First you have to define what an individual is, and you have to also have to define what persistence is. And so, and this is just philosophy in a nutshell. It's just defining what we mean by certain things before we talk about them. um, and in today's question, we're going to just talk about what we mean by sadness because it is such an encompassing term. It can encompass so many different kinds of things. I think I'll start off by defining what I don't mean. So here's what I don't mean by sadness or sorrow, perhaps. What I don't mean is sadness or sorrow over guilt or shame. Maybe you did something wrong, you stole a cookie, maybe you crashed your friend's bike into a brick wall. Who knows? Sorrow over guilt and shame. That's not what I mean by sadness. Sadness from loss. Maybe you lost your pet, you lost a loved one, or you lost some thing that had great sentimental value for you, whatever that object was. Maybe it was your car that you had a lot of memories in, and the car just randomly exploded and it's gone. And you have a loss, and your sadness from that loss. I also don't mean physical pain, right? Because you can have chronic physical pain and you can get depressed from that. Like, when a lot of times when I get really hungry and I'm experiencing hunger pain, I get really sad. I get extremely existential. Some people get angry. I do. That does happen to me from time to time. Clinical depression. That's another thing that I don't mean when I talk about sadness. There's a difference, stark difference between that clinical depression and the sadness that I'm talking about. So those are ideas of sadness that I'm not necessarily talking about. So let me talk about what I mean. Like, what do I mean by sadness? A simple way, I think kind of a simplistic way to put it would be to say movies that make you cry. Movies that make you cry. One of the reasons why Pixar films used to do so well, now I say used to do so well. We can talk we can talk about how they're doing today. I don't maybe you love the films they make today, maybe you don't. I've just seen a couple more recent ones and I'm like, eh, you know. Anyway, I'm getting too distracted. uh, but the reason why they used to do so well is because they didn't just speak to kids; they also spoke to adults. I mean, films like Up would leave a grown man crying within the first 5 minutes, and of course, movies like Inside Out. Why do why does Pixar make so many films like that? If sadness was such a negative emotion, right? If I'm experiencing that sort of sadness from that moment in that specific scene, like when Carl's wife dies in Up. If it's such a negative emotion, if emotional feelings related to sadness are something we should avoid, then why do these films do so well? Why do we keep coming back to them? Why do we want more of them? Why do they keep making more of them? I think a word that might encapsulate the type of sadness that I'm talking about the most would be the word melancholy. Melancholy is perhaps the closest word to describe the kind of sadness that I'm talking about. And it's sometimes been defined as the emotion of experiencing nostalgia. Nostalgia is an experience. It's something that occurs, a moment, an event And melancholy is an emotion that is the result of that or the consequence of that. Susan Cain, in her book, Bittersweet, she says this: there is something strangely nourishing about sadness, the awareness that life is fragile, fleeting, and precious. That's what gives art its soul. Victor Hugo, sorry, we're gonna spend a little bit of time on Victor Hugo. He was a 19th century French poet, writer, romanticist, and a dramaticist, and a philosopher and thinker in many regards. He's best known for his work Les Miserables. Les Miserables. I can't speak French very well. I'm sorry. Les Mis, and he's also known for The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So you've probably heard of those two. He says this. He says that melancholy is the happiness of being sad. What does he mean by that? What does he mean by melancholy is the happiness of being sad? Well, melancholy is different from grief or depression, which are those definitions of sadness that I said we're not talking about. It's different. It's sadness mixed with beauty, nostalgia, and acceptance. See, when Hugo calls it happiness of being sad, he's describing tender space, that tender space where we allow ourselves to feel sorrow, not as something to escape, but as something to cherish. See, it's the feeling you get when you look through old photos or you watch a sunset knowing it will soon fade. There's sadness there, but it's beautifully alive. Pure joy can feel shallow without contrast. Just pure and unadulterated joy can feel shallow with no contrast to it. It's the awareness of loss and change and impermanence that makes joy more meaningful. I'll never forget this scene in Inside Out where Riley experiences something she had never experienced before. If you haven't seen Inside Out, first of all, what are you doing? Second of all, Riley's the main character. Um, and for the first time in her life, she experiences melancholy over a moment of nostalgic reflection. And it was that moment where I believe she was hugging her parents and she had sort of like semi ran away and then ran back home and then had this just kind of emotional breakdown, and she like hugged her parents, and one of those little orbs, I forgot what they were called now in the movie, one of those little orbs rolled out, and it was core memories, that's what they were called, those little core memories rolled out, and it was the first one that was yellow for joy, but it was also blue for sadness. And it's so beautiful. What's so beautiful about that scene is that it's a it's a visual representation. It shows us the importance of both sadness and joy in our lives. Riley was no longer experiencing this endless joy and bliss of being a kid, which should be your experience of childhood. Childhood should be that place in which we have this endless joy and bliss, even though it's not always. We have sadness, but the sadness that I'm talking about shouldn't be. But now she understands what makes those moments so wonderful to begin with. You see, when Riley was just a kid, she had these fun moments, not realizing that someday she's going to look back at them and feel pain. Not because those moments were bad, but because she realizes why they were so important, why they mattered so much, why they were so awesome. Perhaps this is just side thought. Perhaps someone who just always seems full of happiness and joy nonstop, constantly. Maybe you know someone who doesn't ever seem to have a bad day, or someone who feels like something right out of a Disney film. First off, those are wonderful people to be around, and I hope you know someone like that. Second of all, though, it feels unbalanced. Let me explain what I mean. Imagine a spectrum. Okay, she's got like spectrum here. On one side, you have complete, untethered, utter joy, absolutely all the time, 24/7. On the other side, you have gloomy, sad, melancholy, Eeyore, oh, why bother? Just 24/7 constantly, okay? Now, the place where sadness changes us, where it changed Riley and Inside Out, is somewhere in the middle. Now, in life, you'll find people who are often always bubbling with joy and people who are always sad with melancholy. People who are always bubbling with joy, people who are always sad with melancholy. As a culture, we encourage people away from the sad side of the spectrum, right? Of course we do, because we associate happiness with positivity. Happiness is a good thing, it's a beneficial thing. So we want people away from the sad side of the spectrum and we want them to be in the middle, right? Or at least in the middle. And we do that as a culture. We encourage that as a culture. But why don't we encourage people away from this side of the spectrum and towards the middle? Right? Because if the middle is the most important place to be, if the middle is the most important aspect of our development, our cognitive development, emotional development, then why isn't that the place we encourage both sides to go to? And we meet someone who's overwhelmingly joyous and happy, and we're like, wow, I want to be like that, or like that's something that you like look up to, or like maybe not jealous, but like we say like this is something to be achieved and to be attained, rather than maybe they should move closer. Maybe they should be a little bit more sad, right? 'Cause sounds weird, like even saying that. Maybe they should be a little bit more sad and like be in the middle. Because we do it to the people that are on the other side of the spectrum. Say, well, you need to be more happy. You need to like have more joy. Why that is, I'm not going to get into that here because like that's just kind of an open-ended rhetorical thought that I had. I think perhaps maybe one of the reasons is because we don't always understand the nuance of sadness. Because we don't always understand how different sadness is expressed in our lives, and that depression, grief, sorrow, those kinds of things are very different from the kind of sadness that is a necessary part of your emotional development. And we don't always understand the difference between those things. Maybe again, I'm just random guy spouting stuff. I could be totally wrong. So melancholy or sadness is, you can almost describe it as joy's shadow. It's the reminder that things are precious because they pass. So Victor Hugo is saying there's a quiet contentment in simply feeling deeply, even when the feeling is sad. That's why Susan Cain in her book Bittersweet, like we had just said, that's why she says that there is something strangely nourishing about sadness. That's what gives art its soul. Of course, we have A. Milne, Winnie the Pooh, who said, how lucky I am to have something that makes saying goodbye so hard. But here's the question. I think this is the question that, right? So, this is the ultimate question that I mean to get to with this topic. Why sadness? I mean, why do we experience melancholy? Why do Pixar films make us cry? Why is sadness the emotion that we feel instead of any other emotion? When we think about emotional development and we think about the past, we think about old photos and old memories, we think about those things. Or even when we find ourselves in liminal spaces, which maybe we'll do an episode on liminal spaces. If you want to do an episode on liminal spaces, put it in the notes because I'm always open to talk about them. I have a video about liminal spaces on the channel. Go check that out. But even when we're in liminal spaces, we feel that kind of tinge of sadness. But why is it sadness that we feel? Like, why is that the emotion that we feel? And it's not some other emotion like, I don't know, contentment, jealousy, fear, anger. See, whenever we love something, a person, a moment, Maybe it's a season of your life. Sadness is built into it. I mean, it's not that you feel sad when you're in that season of your life, but it's there quietly waiting in the background. Because to love something deeply is to know that you can lose it. When you look at an old photo, you're not just remembering a thing that happened, you're feeling the gap between then and now. The gap the gap is what sadness measures. It's a love that's translated into longing. When we talk about liminal spaces, that's one of the things that we talk about. As you talk, the liminal space is that echo of a past. It's the echo of a thing that was, but no longer is. Other emotions, joy, anger, excitement, they're more present tense emotions, right? They live in the moment. Sadness, though, is the emotion that looks through time. It connects the past, the present, and sometimes even the imagined future. It's what you feel when your soul notices that something once alive in your life now belongs to memory, to your past. That awareness that everything changes, that nothing lasts, is both beautiful and painful at the same time. I've heard it said that sadness is the emotional language of truth about life. So, does it end there? Right? We experience sadness over the knowledge that things pass, that life is impermanent, and that things go away. But does it end there? I mean, is that it? Like, you watch an old video of you when you were in high school and you smile because it happened, right? But then you feel sadness because you're like, oh man, it's over. Life is so short. Is that it? If you remember in episode 10, I believe it was, I talked about Romans 8. Remember in episode 10, we were talking about the question, is nature heading towards dissolution or is it heading towards integration? And I talked about Romans 8, where Paul talks about the groaning of creation. Our experience of melancholy and sadness is an indirect result of the brokenness and aimlessness of creation. Because remember, we talked about what Paul is saying. He says, all creation groans with the pains of childbirth. And when he talks about creation, he's using a word that means aimless, without direction. And our melancholy or our sadness is an indirect result of that. Not that we feel aimless, but that we feel the brokenness that is a result of that aimlessness. That now we're not heading towards this bright and beautiful future, but life is short and is under the penalty, under the limitations of death and mortality. Every single alive thing today is under the limitations of death and mortality. That everyone will die. All of the plants that are currently alive will eventually die. All of the animals that are currently alive will eventually die. And the earth will die. And then our galaxy will die. And then our solar system will eventually run out of energy and just die. And the consequences of that is this sadness, this innate, intrinsic, internal recognition and melancholy over the aimlessness and brokenness of creation, of life itself. Essentially, we feel sadness over the aimlessness of creation. That's as an indirect result of the aimlessness of creation. Because deep down in our soul, somewhere, we know that's not the way it's supposed to be. Matthew 5:4, Jesus is giving the Sermon on the Mount. And this is the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes are, if you've never read the Sermon on the Mount, I'd encourage you to. And I would encourage you to walk through the Beatitudes one by one. But the Beatitudes are a list of qualities that someone who is a citizen of the kingdom of heaven has. Jesus is essentially saying, if you are a kingdom of heaven, here is what you look like. And he says in Matthew 5:4, in one of the Beatitudes, he says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." The word mourn that's being used here, it does refer to someone's brokenness over their sin. When you look up this verse in this context, that is the most frequent explanation that you'll have or be given for the verse. And it's true that it does. And it also refers to this in many other passages where the same word is used, brokenness over sin. But it goes beyond that. It doesn't just mean that. Okay. It means that, which is very important, very essential, but it doesn't just mean that. It's also a sorrow over a brokenness of the world, like Paul talks about in Romans 8. It's the same reason Jesus wept over the death of his friend in John 11. This kind of mourning is a recognition that life is fleeting and that death comes for everyone, and that all our lives will ultimately fade away. Yet, there is a promise. There's a promise at the end of Matthew 5. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. What does he mean by that? When I'm experiencing sadness and I'm watching old videos or I'm looking at old photos and I have this melancholy sadness over joy because this beautiful thing happened, and sadness because I'm recognizing how temperamental and short and fleeting that it is. Jesus is saying that you won't experience the pain of that anymore. You just experience the joy of it. I mean, imagine. I mean, it's hard to fathom, right? Because we're so used to the cognitive experience of the life that we live. But imagine you are looking at old photographs and you experience this happiness that a thing occurred, but there is no sadness. I mean, there is no melancholy. There's just joy, and not fake joy, right? Not joy that's like kind of surface level that has no contrast, but absolute complete joy. That's the kind of comfort that Jesus offers. You see, it's true that we know how precious moments of our lives are, seasons of our lives, and people who are in our lives. It's true that we know how meaningful and precious those things are because of the contrast of the reality of death. That is absolutely true. But imagine, how do I put this? Imagine having that same degree of understanding. Okay, so I understand the importance of seasons and moments of life because I understand, because I'm old enough to look back and see how short life is and how fleeting it is. And so I have so much more value and put so much more weight on moments and seasons of my life. And I try to enjoy them as precious as they are because of that, right? That's the contrast I'm talking about. Imagine I have that same exact level of weight and concentration and understanding and appreciation for those moments in my life without the necessary contrast. That's what Jesus is offering. That's what he's saying. He's saying right now, like you long for completeness and you feel incomplete because you're constantly looking back at your life thinking, wow, I'm really sad that this thing is over because I really enjoyed it and I really loved it. And I'm just getting older every single year, and soon I'm just going to pass away and those things will be no more. That we don't have to feel that way, that we shouldn't feel that way. That's not how we were meant to feel. And we only feel that way because there's brokenness. Now, I think what's interesting is that Jesus offers us completeness, right? He offers to stitch us together so we don't feel that unwholeness and incompleteness anymore. Why and how? Because he took it on himself. He became broken from the Father. who turned his face away from his only son because he took upon his shoulders the sin of the entire world. And in that moment, he became broken for us so that we don't have to be anymore. So we don't have to experience that sadness when we realize how temperamental life is. He became broken for us so that we don't have to. And that's the beauty of the gospel. That's the beauty of Jesus. That he who knew no sin became sin. He became sadness. He became brokenness. He became that aimlessness that Paul talks about. And he took it upon himself. He took all of it upon himself. He said, give me everything. And he did it because he doesn't want us to feel that brokenness anymore. He doesn't want us to be aimless. He wants us to have joy, but not a fake sort of simmering joy. He wants us to completely throw that spectrum I talked about. He just wants to throw it out the door and said, there isn't a spectrum anymore. It's just complete, utter joy, but also complete and utter depth. Like, you're not just going to walk around like la-di-da-di-da-di-da, jumping around in daisy fields, just skipping to some sound of music, right? That's not what he's saying. That's not the kind of happiness that he's talking about. He's talking about shalom. That's the kind of happiness he's talking about. What does he mean by that? He means completeness, wholeness, unity, lacking in nothing. No more sadness and remorse over the brevity of life. No more fear or anxiety about certain things that you can't control happening in the future. No uncertainties. No loneliness. No isolation. No feeling unloved, unwanted, or unheard. None of those things anymore. That's what he means. So is it okay to be sad? Yes, it's okay to be sad. I think it's important to know what kind of sadness we mean when we feel sadness or when we ask this question. I think it's important to talk about what kind of sadness we're feeling, because I do think that there's a difference between it. And when we feel melancholy, like when we feel this type of sadness, we need to remember that the thing that makes us feel peaceful in that moment, when we feel that kind of sadness, isn't the sadness itself, but it's the recognition of something beautiful that had happened long ago. What I mean is, like, if I'm listening to, because I'll do this sometime, if I'm listening to ambient music, there's playlists on YouTube, and they're just liminal spaces playlists, and it's just this ambient atmospheric music with like liminal photos just kind of in a slideshow. I'll listen to that music and I'll just feel this like calming like tinge of sorrow, like this melancholy feel that we're talking about. The reason why I feel this calm and just kind of like peace is because my brain or my mind is remembering a time where I didn't have to think about painful things. It, it I guess you could say it's kind of a coping mechanism in a sense. That when you're listening to this kind of music or having these kind of memories, perhaps your mind is categorizing, it's shuffling itself away into this corner of your memory where it feels safe. And when I listen to this liminal space kind of atmospheric music, it calms me down because my mind feels safe, because that's what it associates those kinds of things with. And the sadness that I feel is the subconscious sadness, because it's a recognition that it's not actually safe. Like it's not real. Like the moment the liminal space that it currently finds itself in, where it feels safe, it feels insulated from anything that could hurt it. It knows that it's not going to last, that it's going to fade away, and eventually I have to go back to normal life. I think it's important to remember that the thing we find comforting and beautiful isn't the sadness itself, but the sadness is what allows us to see the thing that's comforting and beautiful. So I'd say those are two things that perhaps I could take away from this question. Is it okay to be sad? I might say, yes, it's okay to be sad. I think it's important to feel sadness. It's important to let yourself feel emotions. Sure, we can let our emotions run wild, go crazy, do things that we don't want them to do. But it's also dangerous not to express them at all. I mean, you saw what happened in Inside Out. Riley was suppressing a lot of emotions because she had to be happy all the time. And she was sad on the inside. She was struggling with the fact that she had a life in, I think it was Wisconsin. She had a life there. She had friends. She did things a certain way. She was a certain type of person who had certain kinds of friends. And like her life was just stable and consistent. And then her family just uprooted and moved to, I think it was San Francisco. And everything changed. I mean, everything changed. And she wrestled with it. And she took all of those emotions that she experienced and felt and just shoved them away. She ignored her anger, she ignored her frustration, she ignored her jealousy, she ignored her fear, she ignored all of it, and she just like, I got to be happy because I want to be like I was when I was in Wisconsin. And if you remember from the movie, it didn't end very well. Shoving her pains away did not end well. It ended with her almost making one of the dumbest, unfortunate decisions that you could make as a growing teenager and just run away. Dangerous decision. And that was a result of her bottling up all those emotions. So I think it's important that you let yourself experience emotion, that you let yourself experience sadness because you need to give yourself a chance to process it. And that goes for any emotion, not just sadness. Man, I love this question. Such a good question because it just kind of makes you think a lot about the way we talk about emotions and the way we talk about their usefulness. I think it's very easy to live in a culture where we're just constantly like we have to be happy all the time. We have to be happy, we have to sound happy, like and that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but a question like this really gets us to pause and reflect about it really gets us to realize that other emotions are just as important, if not more important than joy and happiness. And we need both in order to be emotionally developed. So the next time like you talk to someone and maybe they sound a little defeated, you know, ask them what's up because you love them because they're your best, your best friend or family member, not that. But keep in mind that they don't have to be happy in that exact moment. They don't always have to have this inexpressible joy because we're human and no one realistically does. So that's episode 13. Is it okay to be sad? I would love to hear what you have to say about the question. Is it okay to be sad? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on sadness? What are your thoughts on happiness? I'd love to hear them. Thanks for joining me. Look out for episode number 14. And again, go ahead and scan that QR code up there in the corner. I would love to hear from you. I would love to have a conversation with you even more. And if you wanted to be on the show and you actually wanted to talk about a question that I've already dealt with, that's okay too. I would love to do that. Like if you watched an episode of the show and you think, man, like here's this question that I answered, like I have a lot to say about this. Hit that, scan that QR code. I would love to have you in the show to talk about it, to hear your perspective, and to wrestle with that question in a different way. All right. Well, you guys, everyone listening, thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful Saturday, a wonderful weekend, and enjoy the rest of your day. Love you all. Talk to you later.